And thank you, Ms. Rose.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Doctor, I just want to talk about your background briefly. You said that you are an optometrist
Yes.
and you have degrees in psychology. Is that correct?
I have a bachelor degree was in psychology with the emphasis in physiological and perceptual psychology. And I studied 1 year as a graduate student in the master's program at Long Beach State University before I was accepted to optometry school.
Okay, so you're not a licensed psychiatrist,
No.
correct? Or psychologist, correct? Now, going over some of the things that you reviewed in preparation for your testimony, in this case, defense counsel went through various documents, and I believe you also noted those documents in your report, correct?
Correct.
And you said you read a report by Paradigm Forensic Science Services, correct?
I reviewed that, yes.
Okay, and that has to do with ballistics, right?
Yes,
You're not here today to give an opinion as it relates to ballistics, correct?
that is correct.
And you also read Glen Oaks Pathology Medical Group on cause of death, correct?
I perused that.
And you're not here to give an opinion on cause of death.
No.
And you also reviewed the audio analysis report from Greg Stutchman, correct?
Yes.
And you're not here to give an opinion on audio, correct?
No, I'm not.
Now, I'm going to assume, but you don't list it, that you reviewed Officer Brelo's statement.
Yes, I saw his interview.
Okay. When you say you saw Defendant Brelo's interview, did you review his entire interview?
I have to qualify that of what I was given. I don't know if there was more.
Okay, you just didn't list it in one of the things that
Okay.
you reviewed. But you're telling us today in
Yes.
court that you reviewed his entire video statement, or did you read a statement?
His video statement.
Okay. And you reviewed the entire video statement?
Of that which I was given, I'm not 100%
Okay.
certain that I was given.
Whatever video you was given, you reviewed
Yes,
the entire
yes.
thing. The video that you watched of Defendant Brelo, did it conclude during that video that you watched?
I don't recall.
So you don't recall anything that may have happened at the end of the video?
Specifically, I guess I'd have to ask you, what are you making reference to?
I'm just asking if you recall watching the video, and at the end of the video, they conclude the video and everyone gets up from the table. Do you recall seeing that?
Yes.
Did you review the videos of the other 12 officers who shot that night?
No.
And you didn't meet with Officer Brelo prior to giving this opinion, correct?
Correct.
You didn't perform an eye exam on Defendant Brelo, correct?
That is correct.
You didn't request any prior eye exam records for Defendant Brelo, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't go to the scene of the incident prior to writing your report, correct?
No, not until last night.
Now, when talking about eyes and vision, you would agree that not everyone has the same quality of eyesight, correct?
In a police department where they've been, are you saying in general?
I'm saying in general, you would agree
I would agree.
that perhaps you and I, we don't have the same quality of eyesight, correct?
I don't know what your eyesight is.
Okay, but you're wearing glasses, correct?
Yes.
You talked to us about a building glare being caused from overhead police lights, possibly. Is that right?
Correct.
And you said that a building glare is experienced when the optic nerve is overwhelmed with a higher level of lighting after having been adapted to dim lighting, correct?
That it is, even if it's not adapted, just an overwhelming light can produce a veiling glare. It does produce a veiling glare.
Okay, but in your report, you write, a veiling glare is experienced when an optic nerve is overwhelmed with a higher level of lighting after having been adapted to dim lighting. You write that in your report,
Yes.
correct? And you also write, the sudden introduction of bright light induces a veiling glare, correct?
Correct.
And you use the word sudden in that opinion, correct?
Yes.
One of the examples you gave, in your opinion, was a police officer pulling over a vehicle. You recall that example?
Okay.
That the overhead lights are used to attract the person that they're trying to pull over, correct?
Correct.
And you also state in there that once the police officer gets out and is exposed to that lighting, that becomes a glare, a veiling glare.
You said becomes, could you repeat your exact words? Could you repeat the last phrase?
Yes, once a police officer gets out of that vehicle,
Yes.
because of the overhead lights, he is then exposed to a veiling glare.
That's correct, yes.
Now, doctor, how long, I know that you reviewed the background materials for this case. How long did the pursuit take place in this case? How long was
A
it?
little less than a half hour,
Was it nighttime or daytime?
nighttime.
You state in your opinion that defendant Brelo's eyes were light adapted to daylight levels. You recall that?
That, I don't specifically recall that, but I'd say yes, that because of he had been exposed to headlights of cars, that would be his lighting level.
And that's what you call daylight levels.
That would be a lower end of daylight.
But you don't put lower end of daylight in your report, correct? You can refer to it if you like.
Well, it would be daylight.
So let me just make sure that I understand you. If it's nighttime, I'm outside in a vehicle, my eyes are light adapted to daylight levels. Is that what you're saying?
If you have been within the last, let's say, 10 minutes exposed to headlights, that you are adapted to the lower end of daylight.
Okay. So if I'm exposed to headlights, I'm adapted to that.
Yes.
What about if I'm exposed to overhead lights?
It's a degree of magnitude that the wigwag lights on a light bar are very, very intense, as you saw in the photographs, that the nighttime illumination underneath a lighting device that occurred, for example, during the pursuit, I'm making reference to Exhibit F, that if you were standing underneath this overhead light, you'd be under the lower end of daylight, but in these flash bars here of the overhead light, that is many, many, many times brighter.
So, doctor, what you're telling us is if I'm in a pursuit for a long period of time, or if I'm surrounded by police officers with flashing lights during that entire time, right and close me, that my eyes won't adapt to that?
No, not to that brightness.
Okay. I'll be blinded, is what you're telling me.
I would caution you of using the word blinding because that's a medical condition that's irreversible.
It would make it very difficult for me to see, is what you're
Yes.
telling me. I would still be able to drive, correct?
It depends on what you were asked to do with driving, because if you still had the veiling glare, there would be things that you might miss.
If I am to push my foot on a gas pedal and steer a car, I could still do that with the overhead lights all around me on the streets, correct?
You may still miss something. You know, I'm not
Doctor, I'm only asking you specifically about the ability to drive, not to observe right now. I would still be able to physically drive that car, correct?
And you're not referring to safety. You just
I would physically be able to drive the car, correct?
correct. You could put it in forward movement.
Thank you, doctor, for the answer. And you are aware that Officer Brelo was in a vehicle that night, correct?
Of course.
You are aware that he was driving a vehicle that night, correct?
Yes.
Now, whether putting overhead lights aside, you would agree with me in general that the eye can adapt to lighting.
Within parameters, yes. There's certain light that it cannot adapt to.
And doctor, did you say you used to be a police officer as well?
That is correct.
You used overhead lights, correct?
Yes.
So they did use it when you were a police officer? Correct?
Yes.
And they still use overhead lights today, correct?
Yes.
You would also agree that whether or not a person is exposed to a veiling glare could depend on how a person is positioned, correct?
Well, they'd have to be exposed to a veiling glare, they'd have to be positioned in a position to have their eyes receive that light.
And also whether a person is affected by glare or veiling light could depend on what the person is focusing on, correct?
If the light enters the eye, it will have a predictable effect of bleaching the rhodopsin and the cone-related rhodopsins in the eyes is predictable.
Doctor, you would agree with me that if there is an overhead light flashing on a vehicle, and I'm not looking at that light, but instead of looking toward a downward position, my eyes would have a different effect in terms of whether or not I am visually impaired by the light.
Yes, the light entering the eyes.
The answer is yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And also whether a person is affected by a veiling glare depends on how close they are to the light.
Correct. A very good point.
You make reference to Mr. Benya's report, the lighting expert.
Yes.
You're not a lighting expert, correct?
I have a background in lighting and I am board certified in radiometry of light.
Okay. I'm talking about a lighting expert in terms of going out to a scene, measuring different halogen lights or different various types of light. You don't have a degree in that or a license in that, correct?
No.
You make reference in your report about Mr. Benya photograph, I believe it's referred to as Exhibit B in your report, and it's pictures of vehicles with the lights turned off. You recall making reference to that?
Could you give me the page number on the report?
Sure. You don't have page numbers on your report, but I will.
Oh, I believe that's page 11. Is that Exhibit B, photograph of the scene provided by County Prosecutor's Office?
Correct.
Yeah, I have that here.
Okay. And you state that it omits the veiling glare, correct?
Correct.
You also state that the photo underrepresents the impediment to Officer Brelo's vision that existed when the light bars were operating, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You are assuming that there was, in fact, an impediment to his vision, correct?
Now, if the light bars were on, and the light bars were an impediment to his vision.
Depending on how he was and what his position would have been, correct?
From what I know of the position and where he was positioned in between units 217, 238, and possibly on the trunk of that and on the hood possibly of the Malibu, his vision was impaired by the light bars.
Defendant Brelo never told you his vision was impaired, did he? Yes or no question, Doctor?
No.
And when you state that Mr. Binion's report, the photograph with the lights turned off omits the veil and glare, you would agree with me that photos with the lights on would be more representative of what could have taken place that night, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't review any photos like that from Mr. Binion, correct?
That was my point, and my objection is that he took pictures of a situation that did not exist.
Okay, so you didn't review any photos from Mr. Binion with the lights on?
There were not in this report,
Okay.
and I have trouble with the quality of his work, that the photographs that he included were not as they were at the scene, yet he provided, upon inquiry, additional photographs that did in fact show the light bar. And so these photographs that show no light bar on it are extremely misleading, when in fact he had photographs he could have included in there and had a meaningful discussion of the disability that Mr. Brelo was under.
So again, you didn't review any of his photos with the lights on?
I saw them after I had read this report, and they were submitted, I believe, to the defense counsel after I had written my report.
Okay, but you did know that he took photos with lights on?
Eventually I learned that
that's what I'm getting at. When you
Okay.
wrote your report, you didn't know that he had photos with the lights on, correct?
And they were not included in the report.
You also write in your report, you say, I suspect the light bars were turned off by investigators who found the light bars interfering with their vision during their post-shooting investigation. Remember writing that in your report?
Yes.
You didn't speak with those investigators, did you?
No.
That was an assumption that you made, correct?
Yes.
Now going to where you list scientific areas of concern. You state that Brelo's ability to visually discern if the suspects were or were not deploying firearms after the Malibu crash into Unit 238 is of concern to you, correct?
Yes.
You already spoke to us about muzzle flashes of guns, right?
Yes.
And that there is a, how did you explain it, an orange?
Orange donut, orange glow, orange ring.
Right, orange ring, donut, or glow that comes out of a firearm when it's shot, correct?
During hours of darkness, you can see the expanding, burning hot gases.
And it was dark when this incident took place.
Yes.
Officer Brelo never told you, nor did you read or watch, that he ever said that he was blinded by any orange glow from his own gun, correct? It's a yes or no question, Doctor.
No, he did not report that, which people don't.
Well, he did report that his hearing in his right ear got messed up from firing inside of his vehicle, right?
I don't specifically recall that.
You watched the video, though, correct?
Again, yes.
And if Officer Brelo said that he was able to see the occupants inside the vehicle, you wouldn't disagree with what he says, right?
It would depend on what degree of discernment he related that he could see. To see the persons, their general outline of a person inside a car, I would say that's something I'd expect would be possible to see.
Okay. Would you expect it to be possible to see if a person has their arms raised inside of a vehicle?
Under these circumstances, I wouldn't expect him to be able to see that.
So if Defendant Brelo said he was able to see their arms were raised, you would say that he's not telling the truth?
He may have been inferring from one thing to another. Well, I'm answering your question and you're shaking your head no. Is that somebody, if you made the gesture of their hands up like this, it may have been another body movement or general movement or something that he saw during the stroboscopic effect that induced the appearance of movement.
So basically, if he says, I saw them raise their hands, you would say, no, you didn't. That was an illusion. You saw something else.
I didn't say that.
As it relates to this orange glow or donut or ring, if somebody was shooting inside of the Malibu, would you expect their gun to have an orange glow, ring, or donut?
I would expect it to have that. And it would also depend on the caliber and the direction in which it was being pointed.
So you would expect them to have that, possibly with a handgun?
Possibly, yeah.
Because you've already stated that as it relates to the orange glow, it's burning gas from the cartridge, right?
From the gases being burned in the cartridge casing.
And you said you do a lot of readings, correct, on literature that's written about muzzle flashes. Do you read up on any of those?
Do I read up? Not on a monthly basis. I know of the mechanics of the chemistry of burning gases and what was portrayed in the pictures. I directed to have those pictures taken because it's a phenomenon known to me.
Do you also know, since you do occasionally read up on that type of stuff, including weapons, that a complaint of muzzle flashing guns is that it can reveal your position to an attacker? You ever read that?
Well, if under...
Have you ever read that?
I know of that.
And you said that you never read any of the other 12 shooter statements in this case.
That is correct.
Do you think it's important to know what the other officers involved in the case claim to have seen?
I read from the standpoint of the defendant and the set of circumstances, and of the other 12 persons is not of paramount importance because of the psychological effects and because of the exclusionary effects and because of tunnel vision that happens at traumatic scenes.
Okay, so hypothetically, if there were other people around who had also fired their weapons and they claimed they can see everything clearly, they can see their targets clearly, that would be important to you in terms of what was visible that night?
As far as I can tell you, that if somebody said that they could sight their weapon and see the target clearly and see everything in the periphery target and the peripherally clear, I would tell you that is physiologically not possible.
Thank you. You also stated that the defendant's emotional state was likely near panic. You recall putting that in there?
Yes.
And you go on to state that his training and a military experience was most likely what kept him from being defeated by acute extreme fear. You recall putting that in there as well?
Yes.
Okay. So, would you agree with me that training is important?
Of course it is.
And in this case, you said his training is likely what kept him from being basically overcome by acute extreme fear, correct?
Well, the average person without that training would probably turn and run in the opposite direction.
You would agree with me, having been a police officer, that you get training?
Of course, policemen get training.
Now, you talked about the neurological condition called, and I'm not going to attempt to say this word, the T word.
Tachyphagia?
Tachyphagia.
Or tachykinesis.
Okay. And in that you state that there's a release of hormones into the brain, correct?
Yes.
You've interviewed police officers who have suffered from this, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you actually sat down and you met and talked with these officers who experienced it, correct?
Yes,
You didn't do that in this case with defendant Brelo.
that is correct.
And you spoke of tunnel vision as well, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall in Officer Brelo's statement that you reviewed that he actually said, I must have had tunnel vision?
I don't specifically recall those words.
When you were giving the material to read about this case, were you aware that tunnel vision may have been an issue?
Tunnel vision in police is always a potential issue in police officer involved shootings.
Okay, you said Attorney D'Angelo is the one who called, correct? Attorney D'Angelo is the one who called you, correct?
At first we spoke in person.
Okay, well, Attorney D'Angelo is the person that you spoke to, correct?
Yes, he was the first person I spoke to in regards to this case.
Did he give you some background about the case to see if you were qualified to do what he needed you to do?
He had just heard an hour lecture that I gave, so I would answer that in the affirmative.
Okay, and it's reasonable that you would have spoken to the person who's going to retain you generally about what the facts were of the case, correct?
Yes. Although at the time I did not know that I was going to be retained in the case.
I understand, but when you're talking to someone to see whether or not they are going to retain you, you want to know what the case is about, correct?
Correct.
And you also put in your report that it is not certain that all officers at the end point of a pursuit and shooting would experience visual exclusion / tunnel vision, correct?
Correct.
You also say that it's a well-documented phenomenon, is that right?
Correct.
So there's articles out there about tunnel vision, right?
Yes.
So if I wanted to learn more about tunnel vision, I can go pull up articles and I can read about it, right?
Yes.
Those articles talk about under what circumstances one may get tunnel visions, correct?
And it's not limited to police work.
That's not what I'm asking. The articles talk about under what type of circumstances.
Under stressful circumstances.
Right. And that's discussed in the articles, correct?
That would be mentioned in there.
They even talk about symptoms of tunnel vision, correct?
Signs or symptoms are you referring to?
Signs. Is that better?
Well, as far as what the signs would be for a clinician if he were there to examine during the event.
Right.
Because they are transient.
And articles talk about that, correct?
Yes.
You talk about the peripheral vision, and that if you focus on one thing, you're not really going to have a clear picture of what's around you, right?
I have to stop you. You mentioned the word focus, which has this very specific meaning in visual science. Are you talking, I believe you're saying fixating.
Fixating.
Not focus.
Okay. If you're
Okay.
fixating on one thing, you're not going to have a clear vision of the things that are around you, correct?
Well, we never have a clear vision in our peripheral vision.
So the answer is yes, it's correct.
The answer is yes, our peripheral vision is always diminished.
Okay. But if I turn my head and I actually look this way at what's next to me, that's not my peripheral vision anymore, correct?
That's correct. You have made a fixation.
You are aware that Defendant Brelo turned and looked at several things the night of this incident, correct?
He must have turned his head. Everybody is turning their heads. And
So is the answer yes?
yes.
Doctor, just so that I'm clear, you're not saying that under these circumstances, you can never see a handgun in a vehicle. That's not what you're telling us, right?
No, it would not be impossible in all conditions.
You said not impossible in all conditions. However, you do feel that it would be impossible in this condition.
That is correct.
So, if there is a situation where police officers are crowding around each other with police lights flashing at nighttime and they shoot their weapon, would it be your testimony that they had glare in their eyes, they couldn't have seen inside the vehicle?
There's no way with that information I could answer that question.
Okay, because I just kind of gave you some general information, correct?
You gave me very little general outline.
Sure.
Now, doctor, assume you have a case where there were 100 plus shots fired. Everybody who was firing was looking at their target. Their target was stopped. And then they stopped shooting when someone got in their line of fire. Do you think they would be able to see, or were they mistaking that someone got into their line of fire?
If they were in the line of sight between their eye and their intended target, I would expect for them to be able to see it.
Okay, so you would expect for somebody to be able to see if I'm shooting from over here, someone jumps in the middle and my target is here. You would expect them to be able to see that object in the middle.
As I said, if it was in the line of sight, I'd expect for them to be able to see it.
Okay, but you're telling us here today that if someone stood there and said that they were aiming looking at their target, that they really wouldn't be able to see their target.
I would say it would not be clear. It would not be the point that's in focus. And I could give you an example that you could look at one thing and see something in the distance that would be out of focus, but one would still see it.
But if you're looking at that one thing that is in focus, you should be able to see it, right?
At the one such as the sight, because that's when aiming a weapon what you would see.
When you say, and you've already spoke about this with counsel, asked you some questions. You gave an example of firing a weapon, and you said that when you're firing a weapon, your eye is lined up at your gun, right, to go to your target, correct?
It's focusing on the front sight with the rear sight slightly out of focus, equal amount of lights between the two bars, and your target slightly out of focus.
Doctor, would you agree with me that that's how you're trained to shoot, right?
That's how one shoots.
That's how you're trained to shoot, right?
Yes.
You can't say that everyone shoots like that, can you?
If they're hitting their target, they are.
So if they're hitting their target, then they're looking at that gun.
There has to be proper sight alignment on a conventional sight to hit your target.
Now, doctor, isn't it true that if your vision is impaired, if you can't see your target, then you shouldn't be shooting your gun at your target, correct?
I'd have to ask you what you mean by is your vision impaired?
If you can't see, you shouldn't shoot your gun, correct?
To what degree of impairment? Because you're focusing on your front sight? Is that what you're meaning?
I'm saying if you can't see clearly inside of a vehicle in terms of what somebody should be doing or is doing, you shouldn't shoot them, correct? You're an officer before.
If you have reason to believe that they are armed and acting to hurt you, then you shoot them to neutralize the threat. Otherwise, you may die.
I like that word. You said neutralize, correct? You said
Yes.
neutralize, right?
Because you are not shooting for any other purpose other than to stop the use of that weapon.
Thank you. You also state that defendant Brelo vision may have been obstructed because of a fractured windshield on Malibu, correct?
That would have impaired the view inside the vehicle, one of the factors.
You would agree with me that if it had not been fractured, the view should have been better, correct?
Well, there still would have been reflections off of it.
You didn't put anything about reflections in your report, right?
I don't believe so.
I'm sorry.
I don't believe so.
No. But your testimony today that reflections may impair vision.
It would impair the view through the glass.
I'm going to read the part that you put in your report. You state that to determine, and this is under your analysis as it relates to defendant Brelo, to determine whether weapons were being deployed, he had to look into the darkened car's interior. Weapons, which are often blue or Durco black, would be impossible to discern looking through the bullet-ridden and fracture-lined windshield into the darker environment. Do you recall putting that in here?
Yes.
And again, nothing in there about light reflection or light bouncing off of the police unit, right?
Looking into the car by itself would have been a visual disability because it was darker inside and lower contrast.
Again, my question was nothing in there in your analysis about light reflecting off of the windshield, correct?
I did mention the hackle marks and the chondroidal fractures of the glass.
Yep, we just went through that.
Okay, well,
So no.
I did make mention, give me a moment to...
Sure.
In the conclusion, I don't seem to have mentioned the fractures in the glass.
Thank you. One moment.
Sure.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Royster. Do you have any redirect exam based on what you've heard since the last video, Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Royster spent a lot of time asking you if you ever set up an eye chart for Officer Brelo, right?
That is correct.
You didn't, did you?
No.
Didn't get out the big thing that has E and A or whatever and ask him to look at some letters, right?
No.
All right. But as an expert, and as an expert in your field, and with the testimony you've given as an expert, you put the standard for which you begin with right in your report, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that standard is a person who can see with 20/20 vision, right?
Correct. That's
And we talked about that on direct, right?
yes.
Okay. You assume it is a person under 40 years of age who has good vision, right?
Correct.
20/20. And what do we call that? A standard observer, correct?
Correct.
All right. So Brelo might be worse, right?
Yes.
Okay. But what you start with when you do your analysis of what somebody can see and not see is a standard observer who's 20/20, right?
Correct.
So you start with a guy that can see right, right?
Correct.
Now, Ms. Royster asked you a lot of questions about pulling things out of your report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. She asked you about these muzzle flashes, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it fair from your direct examination, your report, even your cross-examination, sir, that a lot of things happen real fast in our eyes that our consciousness can't keep up with?
Yes.
Okay. These, I'm obviously not an optometrist, but these cones and rods and receptors that fire, right?
Correct.
Okay. Under optimum conditions, such as lighting in this courtroom, I'm not getting fired at from every direction, right?
Correct.
Okay. So my eyes are able to adapt, right?
Yes.
And I'm able to look at you, right?
Yes.
I'm able to focus upon you, right?
Yes.
But the more I put you in my line of sight, the more I lose Judge O'Donnell, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that's because my eyes are in your line of sight, correct?
That's because anybody's eyes under those conditions would react in that way, because human beings all share that commonality of vision.
All right. So it's not just Tom Shaughnessy, it's the standard observer.
Correct.
Okay. So if Judge O'Donnell came down here, he'd be a standard observer and said, well, we're a little bit older than 40, so perhaps we're not standard observers anymore, but somebody under 40, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the same, and that's the basis on which you form your opinion, correct?
Correct.
All right. And a lot of those things happen that we can't keep up with, right?
That is correct.
And I'm not going to drag you all the way through each one of them that we talked about on direct exam, but in summary, things happen that take, I think you said, to a second and a half to process from what we see to when we can move.
Correct.
And that's the Smith & Wesson study, right?
Yes.
Okay. And things impact on our ability to see, correct?
Yes.
Our vision, right?
Yes.
And you said it, our eyes don't go out and capture, I can't capture the plain dealer lady over there, right? I have to take the light that's coming into me, correct?
That is correct.
That's what a standard observer does, right?
Yes.
Now, as the environment changes, our vision is impacted, correct?
It is.
You were asked on direct examination about veiling glare, correct?
Correct.
And you rightfully said as an expert, depending on how close an officer is or a standard observer is to the stroboscopic lights, can change the veiling glare, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If I'm 150 feet away, I'm not going to get the same effect as somebody that's got their face right in the light front, right?
The intensity of the light decreases as a square of the distance. So the further you get from it, the disproportionately weaker it is. The closer you are to it, the disproportionately stronger it is.
Okay. And you observed Officer Brelo's statement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you, at least without going through all of it, and the pursuit and so on, indicated he was behind Unit 238, correct?
Yes.
The lights are on, right?
Yes.
And he's trying to get an angle at the Malibu, right?
Yes.
Okay. And looking at this model here, this would be 238,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the Malibu.
Yes.
We used to have some little people, but we put a little people right back here, right?
Yes.
What's he looking through?
He's looking through the light. The line of sight is impeded by the flashing of the light bar.
Right. All right. And what effect does that red to white to blue going around and around, and I know they don't go around anymore, but rotating and coming into his eyes due to his ability to have good vision?
It's a continuous veiling glare and a distortion of the perception of color.
Okay. And I think you said that anybody that's had their picture taken with a flash and you turn away and you see some green, right?
Yes.
Okay. Does that go away like that?
No.
In the blink of an eye or the snap of a finger?
In this situation, the reintroduction from another light would be happening so fast that it would just be contiguous.
All right. And then our person gets up there from behind there and they lean across the back of the trunk, right?
Yes.
And as the person or the officer does that, now his face is right up against the light like that.
Yes.
Okay. Closer to the stroboscopic effect.
Yes.
Okay. Increased effect of all the things you testified to.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you move from there to here, is that going to go away in 1 second?
No.
Okay. Is that going to go away in a snap of an eye?
No.
Is it going to go away in 2.4 seconds?
No.
2.6 seconds?
No.
All right. Now, we talked in direct exam about this. The stroboscopic effect on the windshield when it's perfect, all the way to the windshield when it's impaired, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you indicated, for those of us that were old enough to remember the 70s, that strobing light can have the appearance of movement.
Yes.
Okay? And that can have the appearance of movement. If I was in one of those discotheques and I stood still, holding my can of beer, and the strobe light is hitting me, it could appear that I was moving even when I didn't move, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that would be something that a phenomena that would not be unreasonable, correct?
It's actually described as the 5 phenomenon PHI for the court report.
And you also indicated that this is our eyes, our fallible sensory organs, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as such, and I won't go back to it because I know Judge O'Donnell has been listening, but what you told us was that when all of these factors, the noise, the shattered windshield or broken windshield, the stroboscopic lights, the prolonged chase, when those things happen, we can perceive things that didn't occur, correct?
That's correct.
And that doesn't make us liars, correct?
No, it doesn't.
What it says is that our brain processes the information we're provided, such as they're shooting at me.
Hold on, sustain.
There's a phenomena where our brain imports previously learned information to fill gaps, correct?
Correct.
Does that phenomena make somebody a liar?
No, it doesn't.
Is that a well-accepted phenomena in your expertise?
Yes, it is.
You're a doctor to testify as a probable cause or use of force expert, are you?
No,
You're an optometrist, right?
that is correct.
With a degree in perceptual psychology.
That is correct.
Miss Royster asked you, if you can't see into the car, you shouldn't be shooting, right?
Yes, she did.
And it's fair to say that your training as a police officer, if you still perceive the threat, you continue to shoot, correct?
Correct.
Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaughnessy. Ms. Royster, do you have any redirect based on what has been asked since your last inquiry?
Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, you were asked about whether or not a certain phenomenon or a certain perception makes a police officer, means that they're lying. Remember defense counsel asking you that question? If they see something different or perceive something different, it doesn't mean that they're lying. You remember him asking you that?
Yes.
You don't know if they're telling the truth or not, do you?
Could you repeat that? Somebody's
You don't know if they're telling the truth or not, correct?
All of my assumptions are based on that I'm being told the truth.
Okay. So you assume that they're telling you the truth.
That is my basic assumption.
So basically all bad shootings by police officers could be excluded basically where there's flashing lights, correct? They can be excused as good shootings.
I never said that.
But if they tell you that they were blinded by light, you would think that they're telling you the truth, correct?
That would be my basic premise until I learned otherwise, such as last night when I went to the scene and had a police car there, I observed the lights.
Now, Doctor, you saw Officer Brelo's statement. He talked about all kind of different factors that night, all kind of possible obstacles that night. He not once said that the light was an issue for him that night, correct?
I don't recall if he specifically stated that, but he is not a visual scientist.
You have to be a scientist to know what you can see, Doctor.
A lot of people don't know what the disability that they're up against is.
So basically, Defendant Brelo didn't know what he was saying either. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Royster. Sir, appreciate you coming down here. You're certainly excused at this point. Who do you propose the next witness is, Mr. D'Angelo? Is he here today? Here's what we'll do. I don't know how long or short it's going to be, but I would expect, based on history, it's going to be longer than 4:30. We'll take a quick break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go till 4:30, or if you're done with the direct before then, until you're done with the direct, then resume his testimony tomorrow. So, thanks again. I would give those to, actually just leave them there, and they'll be retrieved. So just 10 minutes, so we'll say 20 till. Thank you. Sure.